When you think about businesses that are selling through the roof, like Skims or Allbirds, sure, you think about a great product, a cool brand, and great marketing. But an often overlooked secret is actually the businesses behind the business, making selling and for shoppers buying simple. For millions of businesses, that business is Shopify. It's home of Shop Pay, the #1 checkout in the world. You can use it to boost conversions up to 50%, meaning way less carts going abandoned and way more sales going through to checkout. Upgrade your business and get the same checkout Allbirds uses. Sign up for your $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/income, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/income to upgrade your selling today. Shopify.com/income.
Hi everyone, I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Welcome to Yoga, Birth, Babies, a podcast produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. We will be diving into everything prenatal yoga, birth, and baby related, hoping to inspire, educate, and empower you through your journey into motherhood. Thank you for listening.
Hi, I'm Deb Flaschenberg, and I'm your host of Yoga Birth Babies. And today we're embarking on a topic that I will admit I know very little about. So in this conversation, I'm just as much of a student as you likely are. We're going to talk about mastitis. I know, all I remember when I had my kids is I just didn't want to get it. And those that did have it, that came to the yoga studio during postnatal or baby and me and talked about having it, just seemed very unhappy about it. And so because I knew so little bit about it, I wanted to dive in and learn and share. So we're going to talk about what is mastitis. We're going to talk about the latest research. What's really fascinating is new research came out in 2022, really changing the way that people understand mastitis. It has been greatly misunderstood. We're going to talk about the common causes as well as the signs and symptoms. And then, of course, if you have mastitis, what are the best things to do and what are some of the things you should stay away from? There's still some pretty bad advice out there. So to have this conversation, I have Bella Masotti Rochford. Let me tell you a little bit about Bella. She's an IBCLC, that's an International Board Certified Lactation Consultant, and a National Board Certified and New York State Licensed Occupational Therapist. She owns a private practice, Nurturing Lift, that specializes in lactation and infant feeding therapy and supports families navigating breast, chest feeding, and bottle feeding. Bella has some great information, and the way she explained mastitis really changed how I thought it was. You'll hear me talk about when I did have a clogged duct that I was so scared would turn to mastitis. I did all the wrong things. I mean, like all the wrong things. So, and I don't think I'm alone in some of that thinking. So Bella really clarifies a lot of that. And I'm excited for you to hear this conversation. As always, before we get to my conversation with Bella, I like to give some studio updates. So here we are. We're about to start our second online prenatal yoga teacher training of what I think about the school year, our November-December training. Really excited for that. And then we have another one online January and February. And then if you're in the New York area, we have another one in studio, in person, March, April, and then our postnatal teacher training online in May. So if you are someone that wants to dive into this material and teach your community, check that out. All our stuff in studio is going well. Our in-person classes, our online classes, and of course our workshops. You can check all that out on our website, prenatalyogacenter.com. And then I have a request for you. If you're somebody that wants to share their birth story, or maybe you think you'd be a great speaker or you have a great speaker for the podcast, please reach out and fill out an application because we're here for the community and I want the community to be participants in it. And I think that's it. So thank you so much for listening. We're going to take a super quick break. And when you come back, please enjoy my conversation with Bella.
A Liberty Seguros agora é Yellow. Tudo aquilo que já era bom continua igual. Excelência e proximidade permanecem como nossa essência. Porque não é uma mudança, é uma evolução. A Yellow está sempre em sintonia com você. É liberdade com segurança. A melhor experiência acessível a todos os clientes, iluminando cada passo da sua jornada. Deixe essa luz iluminar seu caminho. Yellow Seguradora. Seguro para viver livre. Consulte seu corretor.
Hi, Bella. How are you?
I am doing great, Deb. Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Thank you. So, as we were talking about before I pressed record, I don't know anything about mastitis. I do remember having a really bad clogged duct that made me want to literally curl up and cry. In fact, I did. I cried a lot because it
Oh
really, really,
no.
really, really hurt. But I know nothing about mastitis. And so I'm here to learn as much as, our listeners. So I'm excited to jump in. But before I guess we get into the topic of mastitis, I want to know a little bit about you and what led you to specializing in lactation and infant feeding therapy.
Yes. Okay. So I guess I'll just start at the origin. So I have always loved biology. I went through college. I'm a New Yorker at heart, born and raised. Went to school up at SUNY Geneseo, and I fell in love with biology. But I also fell in love with psychology, and I was like, how can I mesh these two? So my dad actually was like, have you ever heard of occupational therapy? I kind of found that. And through OT school, I was really always drawn to concepts of like really how to uh, optimize people's function in daily life. Okay. So if a lot of times people give the question of what is OT, I like to always be like, okay, well, we're trying to optimize function, having people live their best lives. So with that premise in mind, I was always drawn to helping people and being a problem solver to places that we don't always look to. So when I finished my OT degree, I went into a pretty general standard practice, got a few years under my belt, but I always drawn to pediatrics and loving it. And through that, in addition to motherhood, my journey with my little one my first happened at that time, and I was thinking to myself, there is this gap. There's this huge gap in postpartum health, in maternal health, in that connection. Where are we here? Why is this happening? So I had the infant development side of things. I really liked the pediatric, the OT idea of things, but there were pieces missing, huge pieces that you can't just kind of take and learn in a day or so. It really required specialization. So through some wonderful mentors, hard work, and really understanding what I wanted to do to fill these gaps, I decided that I was going to go for my IBCLC, which is International Board Certified Lactation Consultant. And I really wanted to niche down into lactation and infant feeding to bring this beautiful mesh together, because what is happening at that time period for families is that no one is an island. Everything is happening. Everyone's joined. And we miss a lot of the connection, and people fall through the gaps. And one of the topics that tends to come up most frequently is something like mastitis is so misunderstood. That's one of the examples of these gaps, that we kind of just don't have the best village or resources always at our fingertips. So specializing in lactation allowed me to really help my families to the best of my abilities and to the best that they deserve and are entitled to.
Oh, I love that journey. And I love your passion for supporting families and then really niching down to helping with lactation and infant feeding. That's great. So, okay, we're going to talk about mastitis. So I guess,
Yes.
what is it? All I
Okay.
know is that it hurts.
Oh my goodness. Yes. So I think in order to understand what mastitis is, the first place that we want to understand is the basics of how milk making happens.
Okay.
Because if we understand what typical or normal should be, we kind of understand where we get to. And I like to talk in a lot of analogies and metaphors, so bear with me. But one of the few of the big terms that I'm going to bring up are microbiome. Okay. So how our body is in different parts of our gut, our mammary, breast, chest area, how that all intertwines, how milk is made in the mammary tissue. Our body there is a gland. So what's supposed to happen is that after your mature milk transitions in the first few days, it's supposed to happen. Everything in between the cells is supposed to get really tight, and it's not supposed to be this like back and flow forth of just anything going into the breast milk. Everything for human milk is an extension of your blood. So if you know that and you understand the direction things are going on, you start to understand that we take basic physiology and apply it to mastitis. So what we now know is that it is not just a single infection or what they call a single pathological entity. It's not like you have a cracked nipple and all of a sudden you're going to get an infection and the next stop is antibiotics. So to know where we are for mastitis now, we had to build from what we don't want to see. So if we know how milk is made, okay, through those like tight little junctions in our mammary tissue, and we know that our body's supposed to filter things, we like to understand that the breast should be treated and that gland should be treated very gently. Because if we shift from the understanding that it's not a single infection, but more it's actually inflammation in the tissue is one of the biggest causes that can kind of lead you down a slippery slope. Mastitis becomes the single thing into what we now see as a spectrum of conditions. So you kind of can go down a few different routes depending on how a person is treating their body, how we're treating mastitis or mastitis type symptoms. So I always like to say what it isn't. And we've come very far, especially in the last few years. We have a new protocol in place through the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine. But it took a long time to get here, and we still have some really poor advice that's out there. So jumping from that point, when we see that spectrum of mastitis type conditions, what we're looking at is big words, ductal inflammation and stromal edema. Basically, there's excess fluid in the tissue. It is making it hard for milk to get out. And by doing that, we have created a situation of milk stasis.
Okay. So gosh, my brain's going in 1,000 directions.
That was a short answer. Sorry.
No. So I know there's new research and it seems like there's new understanding of it. So the original understanding was it was an infection, but you're saying it's actually a lot more about inflammation.
Yes. So what we understood it was that the body was susceptible. There is an infection in that milk-making tissue, and we have to now treat it with antibiotics right away. But now what we understand is that there is usually a slippery slope. There is a place sometimes in terms of infection, specifically bacterial, but it is not the first place. We kind of have now a more comprehensive lens to it.
Okay, so when would somebody need antibiotics and how would they know they need antibiotics?
Yeah, so usually if you get to the point where we talk about different kinds of basic management. So after that point, usually if there's a systemic reaction, which means like your full body we classify it as like flu-like symptoms. You have fever, achy, chills, you don't feel good. Usually if you have more than 24 hours of that feeling, the next step is like a first line of defense for antibiotics. Ideally, a lot of those antibiotics, as I understand, have some antifungal, antimicrobial properties that some parents will feel some relief, which is why sometimes you get a lot of I just went on antibiotics right away, no matter what, at the first signs of trouble. So they might still experience some improvement, but usually if they have a full body reaction that doesn't go away after 24 hours of doing all the other things, that could be a great place to introduce antibiotics.
So what would actually be, so they have fever. What about, I guess when I think about it, and again, I'll admit, I'm like the layperson on this.
Yes.
It's like, And maybe I'm confusing it with clogged ducts. I think like
Yes.
hot and there's a specific spot. It's not that. It's different than clogged
Oh,
ducts.
yes. And I love that you brought that up because we do treat something like, colloquially speaking, plug ducts, clogged ducts. We kind of lump them all together we think that they're interchangeable with something like mastitis. They're not. But because it's a spectrum of conditions, if you experience something like plug ducts, clogged ducts, which is actually that milk stasis, I'll talk about next, if you don't intervene at that time, you might see yourself going onto that slippery slope of having more systemic issues. So how I like to kind of picture milk stasis in my mind is another word for saying, think of like a stagnant pond. Okay. Mm-hmm. There's no flow. There's no movement. Even if the water for some reason started very clear, it had its own microbiome, it was doing fine. Over time, that lack of flow is going to catch up to that fluid. Okay. So it's not a singular clog or blocked milk duct. And I think that understanding is where we get some of the information of, okay, I have to get this clog out because it sounds like this physical, like as long as I get a clog out, I'm good. It's not so much like that. It's that oftentimes that milk hasn't been, for whatever reason, removed in a pace that would allow for optimal flow. So it just kind of stagnates there and stays in that mammary tissue. And from there, things start to brew.
Okay. Yeah. My biggest fear, and the one time I did have a really bad clogged duct, is like, if I don't fix this, it's going to turn to mastitis. Like that was in the back of my head. And I don't even know if that is true. That can be, as you're saying, it can lead into that.
It can lead into that. And it's a very real fear. And I think it is one of the big reasons there might be early cessation from making milk. So some parents are, I should say more than some, experience it happening not once, not twice, multiple times. And we get this rhetoric of this is what you signed up for. This is kind of the thing that comes with this is the journey of milk making. You're going to get clogs. You're going to get mastitis. And that kind of language and that kind of expectation sets a lot of parents up for like, oh, I have to accept this. And when it's just so much to accept, and how you had mentioned before, it's just, you feel awful. You feel like you don't have choices, and early like weaning can also be a result of this because we're not having all the answers.
Yeah. And if someone's like, you're just going to have mastitis, that's part of it. I would be like, well, maybe I'm not breastfeeding then.
Yeah. It's so common and it's so time sensitive, which makes it, especially in all the changes that are happening postpartum, you yourself are being born and now you have to know this whole new body of your own, and you're having all these issues, you're getting all this feedback, and it's just overwhelming. There's a lot of feelings that go along with it.
Yeah. So I just want to make sure listeners are clear. So the signs and symptoms would be kind of almost fluish, I guess. Like I'm imagining that, like feverish, achy. What other? I'm assuming inflammation, like so swollen breasts.
Yes. So usually when you're getting to the point where you're kind of in that, a lot of times you start out in that milk stasis. You start out with like, that milk wasn't moved in a way that your body needed it to move. So, the clock starts. And from there, your body might have different responses. So usually in cases of edema and swelling and inflammation, you have redness, you might have swelling. Usually we look at the chest in terms of quadrants. So each breast will have like an upper quadrant, a lower quadrant, a middle. Like, so sometimes you will see what we classify as like a wedge shape, like red, hot, or warm to the touch. That's basically a warning sign that, hey, something's going on. Sometimes parents won't know anything's up until then. Sometimes you have people where they're like, oh, I'm feeling tender, or I'm noticing a decrease in my supply on that side. So that might be your first stop. That might be like a few days worth of building in there. And then all of a sudden, the hot comes, and then we have like, we're really on the clock for that, like 24 hours if it's like a full body reaction.
These are great. I love having practical information. So people listening, they'd be like, okay, yes, yes, or no. All right. So what are some of the causes? So we said one was clogged ducts, or what was the other word? You're not just clogged, backed
plugged.
up?
Like
Plugged.
you'll hear people say plugged, clogged. They can be kind of like used like interchangeably.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what are the other causes besides that?
Okay. So what I tend to see most in practice, and what we generally in lactation see, is if we look at a more scheduled milk removal versus an infant like cue-based feeding. So if we're going every, say, 4 hours, and then either feeding baby directly at the body or pumping, those bigger intervals can and have scheduled times are more likely to result in that. Sometimes it's on whether it's on baby's end or the flange fit. If either one of those aren't removing the milk as efficiently as they can for different reasons, it's all coming back to, a lot of times, that milk is not flowing. So it's backing up. It's basically.
Can I pause with one thing you said that I want people to hear, because I did not know?
Yes.
Flanges come in different sizes.
I'm
I
gonna
didn't
talk
know
about
that. Oh my
Yes.
goodness. I was
Yes.
dealing with one. I'm truly scarred from this. I was dealing with one that was it
Yes.
came with what I have, my child's 13, my other's 10, so it's been a while. But it was like the Medela, like something go, and
Yeah.
I still remember the sound. Wah, wah, wah. Anyway, so it came with one phalange size, and I had no idea there were others, and it was so painful. And it wasn't until I mentioned it. And at the time, there used to be this place called the Upper Breast Side, which was like 2 blocks from me. It was the best.
Yeah.
And I went there, and the woman, Felina, who owned it, she's like, oh my gosh, let me get all the different sizes you can try. And it made the biggest difference. But I had no idea. And I worked in this world. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I wanted to put that out there, that phalange size makes a huge difference. So, all right, I'm going to give it back to you, but I had to go off on that for a moment.
Oh, I would love to just take that for a second and run with it, because it's something that I feel very strongly about in practice. There's a lot of us, especially in private practice, but there's a growing body of IBCLCs, lactation specialists, that we are really acknowledging that there are nuances and individuality to pumping. Flange fit is huge. Now, we're still building a lot, but I bring individuality to every one of the families I work with. And when I'm working with parents, oftentimes one of the biggest causes of leading to mastitis is ill-fitting flange size. I was fortunate enough to take a workshop by Jeanette Frem. She's like Babies in Common. She's leading the way in terms of optimizing flange fit. And really, when you look at it from that standpoint, you look at your body's physiology. And if we are bringing all this extra tissue into the flange and it's not fitting you properly, then you are also, I always joke, I'm like, it's like Grand Central Station at rush hour right behind your nipple. So if anyone's in New York or here, they get, I don't want to be in Grand Central at that time. It's going to be really hard. So everything, it's like you're trying to get out, the milk is trying to get out, and what
and one tunnel's open and that's it.
Exactly. And you're getting one tunnel and everything else is squished, and that tunnel can only fit certain trains because there's a lot of inflammation and swelling around. That's one of my favorite analogies to use, because it really points a picture of that perspective of what can actually happen to your body. And if everything's getting sucked into the flange, a lot of times you have so much compression of those ducts. So that milk will back up. And it doesn't mean smaller is better blanket statement, but it means that there's a shoe for every foot. We don't expect to go wear a huge shoe and expect to run a marathon. Same thing with flanges. So I think it's really important where we have that discussion that there should be some individuality to pump flanges, because I do see them daily creating a lot of contributing to this problem of milk stasis and then mastitis.
Okay, this is so good. All right, so we've got phalange size. We've got sometimes babies latch, I'm guessing, if they're...
Yes.
Okay.
Poor oral function. Yep.
Okay. And then it was also clogged or I keep forgetting the other word you said.
Oh, plugged. Yeah, plugged. Yeah.
So let's talk about the baby's mouth. I know this is probably totally up your alley as a infant feeding therapy and an IBCLC. What does one do if it's, I mean, a phalange size, you're like, great, I can get others.
Yes.
Mouth. I mean, we can't trade
out the baby. Yes, we can trade out baby at that point. But that is a perfect example of like what we have normalized. And if we're telling parents, oh, well, I mean, that's just part of like what this journey looks like. You're just going to get clogs and just have to deal with that happening, even though baby has poor oral function. And then it happens. I look at patterns. So if something is a one-off, like everything's going great, and then this just one time, I'm like, okay, like maybe there's a reason for that. But if you have things where signs of a painful latch can be just as indicative of something going on as babies falling off constantly. What we're having in that situation is, whatever the reason for baby not being able to effectively bring milk out of the breast, the chest, is going to end up staying there. And what can happen too is if tongue function is suboptimal, you will get instances where baby's tongue, the most important movement is this middle of the tongue coming up and down and creating this vacuum seal at the breast. So if that's not able to happen, baby might also contribute to another cause, which is hyperlactation, those robust supplies, really like big volumes of milk, because they're constantly just overstimulating that nipple. And in order to kind of, babies are built to survive and thrive. They're trying to just get the milk in whatever way is possible. If they need to just hold on and catch a fast flow, that milk release, that let down milk ejection reflex, they're going to do that. So hyperlactation can also go hand in hand with baby's poor oral function. Sometimes the ties will come into the picture, oral ties. I know that's another big topic as well.
Yeah. I did a podcast. I'll make sure that's in the show links, but we did a whole one on, actually, I looked in my archives. I've done now 2 on tongue ties. So I'll make sure they're both in there. So Perfect. Is that what you're going to recommend then? If you suspect it is the baby's mouth, that they're calling an IBCLC, maybe seeing a pediatric ENT just to see what's going on. I'm guessing the first step is an IBCLC.
First step should always, always, always be assess function, because the IBCLC is really the only professional, at least on the ground initially, that is focused on parent and baby. We have 2 patients. We have 2 clients there. And this is where I was first drawn to this, because you have your OB, you have midwifery. I love midwifery too, but you have these providers that pediatrician that are focused on one single person. But the dyad is what we're focused on. So you can only get so much picture by looking at just the baby or just the parent. No one is really spending the time it takes to get to see them as individuals as well as together. So you're missing a whole picture if you're not getting that function piece together and separately. And I think that if I could get my message out to anyone, it would be to have the function assessed first, because there can be some overlapping things of, we got to figure out, is it this or is it that? It's always, a lot of us that do this, we also have a great team and network of colleagues that we can point you in the right direction. So if you do need someone like an ENT or a dentist, someone that can address something further that we're like ankyloglossia, you're going to that's the tongue ties. We're going to be able to connect you to them.
This is so helpful. So now I know some of the common causes. We need to take a quick break. When we come back, let's talk about what to do if you suspect you have mastitis, because now we know what's caused it, but now we got to remedy it. All right, we'll be right back.
Congrats! You're pregnant! Now, what do you do during the next 9 months? You need Preggy Pals. We educate and entertain expectant mothers and those hoping to become pregnant. Each episode features pregnant moms-to-be as well as experts. Together, we explore topics aimed to embrace pregnancy and empower women as they give birth to their babies. Subscribe through your favorite podcast app or say, "Hey Alexa, Play the Preggy Pals podcast. And be sure to visit newmommymedia.com to check out our other parenting shows, Newbies, Parent Savers, Twin Talks, and the Boop Group. Preggy Pals, your pregnancy, your way. You've made it through the first couple of years with your kiddo, and life is crazy. You need Parent Savers. Each week, we provide moms with the practical information they need to help preserve their sanity. With the help of our experts, parents of toddlers get the superhero strength they need to tackle the world and the next sturdy diaper. Subscribe through your favorite podcast app or say, "Hey Alexa, play the Parent Savers podcast." Parent Savers, empowering new parents.
Okay, so we're back, and I'm really curious. I'm kind of throwing three questions at once. I want to know what the best thing to do, the worst thing to do, and then you mentioned there's some, like when we first started talking, some really poor advice still circulating out there. So that's a three-part question. There you go.
Okay. So let's start with the best. We'll kind of start what we want to do. Okay. So what we want to do in the early stages of any signs of, hey, not feeling like I might have tenderness, might have seeing a decrease in supply. Those sometimes can be the earliest, or babies getting fussy when they're trying to feed. Those might be some of the things that's like, hey, I gotta start doing something. So oftentimes what I'll advise parents is, hey, look, what we want to do is increase movement in that right from the get-go. We are very fortunate enough where our armpits have huge, our body's filter system. We have a lot of lymphatic support in that area. So what we're going to do is remember that it's not just milk that is in that tissue. There's blood, there's lymph, there's a whole lot of things that are going into it. So one of the most helpful things you can actually, if someone uses YouTube's wonderful for looking at videos, but we call it lymphatic drainage, a lot of therapeutic lymphatic drainage. Move that breast, move your body, move those glands so that we are starting to get some filtering going on. Now, it's not about just what's coming out through the nipple. It's also moving things back towards your armpits. And when we're using pressure, I usually use the gauge of the kind of pressure you might use on baby, nothing any more heavy-handed than that. And you might do things where you're stroking back towards your armpit and then alternating with focus of expressing through the nipple with the milk. So we're creating room in that mammary gland. We're creating room away from that inflammation in those early stages. Another thing we kind of want to focus on from there is Maya Bolman is an IBCLC, wonderful. She coined this term breast gymnastics. I love it. Some people call it, one family was like, oh, the breast Olympics. I was like, awesome. Yes. So when you take that, you are also really carrying the weight of that tissue. You can bring it up, down, side to side, big circle, counterclockwise, clockwise. We are increasing space and movement in that area.
You're literally just holding your breasts and making shapes, up, down, side. I'm picturing it going off a vault. Okay. All right.
Yep. I'm shake it out, just you're adding movement, because what we're trying to do is, it's Grand Central Station. We want to avoid it being rush hour. We're trying to open up more tunnels, basically.
Okay. I get that.
So those are some of the earlier things you do. Now, as you're doing that, some things that can also help that are not directly based on you making milk, but is supporting your gut health too. So when we look at more inflammatory versus non-inflammatory foods, sometimes things like low sugar, low gluten, dairy, at least in the times where you're feeling this, just giving your body a little extra support, because your gut, there's a lot of research coming out with how crucial your gut microbiome and your gut health is, and that there's a super highway between your gut and your mammary health, and then your gut and your oral health. It's like big superhighways coming up and down through your body. So when you take care of your gut, you're also creating these microbiomes that kind of like, we want there to be more health in that tissue if there was an imbalance in bacteria. I know we started talking about like the clogs and the milk stasis and like what mastitis might start to look like. But bacterial mastitis, though it's not as common as we once thought it was, there's like an imbalance in that flora, that microbiome in your breast. So things like probiotics.
I was just going to say,
Yes.
would taking a probiotic be helpful? Like across the board, like not even waiting for mastitis to start, but just
Absolutely.
for normal gut health?
Yes. It's like probiotics. It's actually mentioned in the protocol as well. Taking probiotics, usually we look for specific strains. I always joke, my husband did take Latin. I did not. So I always butcher the strains. But there's certain probiotics that you want to try to incorporate in those probiotics that can help support a healthy gut. So that would definitely be another route of fermented foods if you prefer to go that route, just increasing that quote unquote good bacteria that we like, anything that's optimizing our like microbiome health at that time.
All right, so those are the good things to do.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of the worst things and then also the worst advice that's still out there.
Okay. So one of the most detrimental things you can do is aggressively massage. And that's something that
I so did that when I had that clog duck. I was like, I'm getting you out there. And I was like,
that's it. Yes. Yup. Because you see it as a single, like, oh, that tunnel is blocked. Let's move that blockage. That perspective is really like I think one of the most helpful things I try to bring, because when we shift our perspective, from that, you don't see it as a singular blockage, but what we do end up doing, it feels counterintuitive. And I always try to tell my parents, I'm like, I get where you're coming from. You think that there's like a blockage there. But when you're increasing that aggressive massage, what you're actually doing is you're shutting down the tunnels at Grand Central Station then. So you are really,
now I can visualize it like if you have, it's funny because I think of like the tubes that someone uses to pump, those clear tubes.
Mm-hmm.
I can now imagine, I'm like, if you're squishing it because you're so aggressively massaging it, it's going to make it worse. So now in hindsight, I can see that. But yeah, at the time I was like, get that clog out.
Yes. Oh, it's because it feels like, that's where it's also important to remember this part of our body is a gland. It's not a muscle. So sometimes we're like, oh, if we have a sore muscle, we're like, let's knead our way in there. So that kind of mentality, we just have to shift it.
Okay.
And then heat.
Yep, did that
get
too.
in a really hot shower and just, I know and up until a few years ago, it was the advice that we always kind of got. It was the advice that if you're in any kind of like, social media group, it was just get in a hot shower. That's the worst combo. The worst of finding get in a hot shower and just go to town, like really try to knead it out. Some people will use combs to try to like really, so that would just be setting you back. So painful. Yes, painful, because what you're doing is you're squeezing the milk out, but you're adding more and more inflammation to an area that needs a lot of extra loving at that point. So those two can be like the worst offenders. One of the other ones that I try to really caution, especially if a parent has a robust supply, an oversupply, they're really in the hyperlactation realm where there's the pros to it, but there's also like more susceptibility in some of these issues is something like a suction collector. So a passive suction collector, the Haka, for example. What we're basically doing is sucking. Remember, it's not just milk in there; it's blood, it's lymph. So we're bringing everything to right behind the nipple, and everything's getting compressed. So sometimes we have people doing soaks into a collector. All those things still frequently circulating, but those are the biggest offenders I could probably say that will you might feel like works but you might be able, like, you will be able to get relief sooner if you don't do those things, and the integrity of your tissue will probably be a lot better as well.
But I think you're really highlighted something about looking at the breast, and in hindsight, I feel like that makes so much sense.
Mm-hmm.
Tissue that we don't want to hurt tissue, and it's not muscle tissue. It's it's different type of tissue,
Yep.
and it's a gland. And I think we often think of our body, like you said, like muscle, like get deep in there. I
Yeah.
think we just have to kind of rethink what are the breasts made of and how are we treating them? That makes so
Yes.
much sense.
Yes. And that's why I think understanding what is supposed to be happening with milk making, understanding our physiology. And when we understand what it's supposed to do, it makes a lot more sense of like, oh, wait, then why are we doing this? And that's where really the questions came where even something like we talked about right before, like the things that can be helpful, ice, cold. Things can be used in moderation, but cold in a period where you're really feeling more tenderness can help because it's helping the inflammation aspect of what's going on in your breast tissue at that time.
And it's
So
so
something like,
opposite of what everyone thinks, like heat it up. And now you're like, no, put some ice on it. That makes so much sense. Inflammation. Yeah.
yes, yeah. And one of the recommendations per like the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine protocol also is using NSAIDs. So I usually have families like if they're comfortable, like they're like, okay, they'll kind of go the NSAIDs routes. I think it's important as well that knowledge can be powerful, that everything like do what works best for your body in terms of that. Some families do find if they pursue the options of like homeopathy, that can be helpful. Other families, there is more moderate evidence on things like therapeutic ultrasound that can be really helping the inflammation at a cellular level. There's fancy words like photobiomodulation, basically red light, infrared light. We're looking at what's going on in that body. Remember, it's not a single infection at that point. It's inflammation. So if we're helping those at a cellular level, we're doing all these things that hopefully we don't get to the point where we need antibiotics. Like because most times we're able to solve things well before that point.
So if someone's doing some of those other therapies you just mentioned, who are they seeing to do that?
Great question. So it depends on your state. Okay. OTs and PTs, so occupational therapists, physical therapists, we have licenses to use what we call PAMs, physical agent modalities. That includes therapeutic ultrasound. So depending on your state, you can go to a PT or OT that has access to not only has access to an ultrasound machine, but also has experience working with the lactating body, because not just anyone can do it.
Your regular.
Yeah.
You can't be like, oh, I had a hamstring issue. I saw a PT. Now I'm going to go for mastitis. Like that doesn't seem like the right fit. So you have to make sure that the OT or PT specifically has this training.
Yes.
Okay.
And which is why it's important that a lot of us as IBCLCs and specializing in lactation, we have these built-in referral like ideas of like, hey, like, you know what, therapeutic ultrasound might be a really helpful modality for you. Here are a handful, like these are colleagues that I know do this. So we take out that leg. That's part of the reason I love doing this, because we take out the legwork of an already exhausting process.
So when does someone know to reach out? Is it the first sign, like, okay, I'm feeling tender, baby's production has gone down? When is it right away, or do they want to see if things kind of resolve? I mean, can things resolve on their own if you're starting to go?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first place. A lot of these things that you can do are very good techniques for overall breast health. Okay. So if you're doing these, I always say it's not a forever thing to be like doing a lot of breast gymnastics, lymphatic drainage, but especially in those first few months where you're still figuring things out, your body's going through tremendous hormonal transitions. There's probably an increase in sleep, increase in stress, I should say, and lack of sleep. You're just having perfect storms of things. There are things that you could do to just take care of your overall body, especially supporting gut health. Because remember, a lot of this can stem from really good support at baseline. If you feel like it's happening more than once, I really tell people, I'm like, we're not on this carousel of like, okay, just like, you're just going to keep getting it and until you wean. I want to change that rhetoric to, hey, if this is becoming a pattern, we should find the root cause. There is a reason that this is happening, and it should not happen. It's not what typical physiology entails. You owe it to yourself to have a better experience making milk for your baby than just being assigned to, well, this is just what you signed up for. So usually if we see that pattern of like, I'll be like, if there's a one-off, maybe it's just a matter of sorting things out. But more often than not, what I hear from families is they're like, we've been going through like multiple rounds of mastitis and like multiple rounds of antibiotics. And that's always like, that's a huge red flag of, hey, we need to figure out what the root is, because we can buy time with a lot of these like more symptom management and helping, but finding the root of like what is causing that milk stasis, for example, what is causing that impedance in milk flow, it's going to just set up the scene for like a much like more pleasant experience for that milk making journey.
That makes a lot of sense. Okay, we're going to take another break. When we come back, what is one final tip or piece of advice you'd like to offer new and expectant parents? We will be right back.
In a world where single moms face countless challenges, the Single Mom Podcast offers a space of support and empowerment. Each episode offers stories of triumph, practical strategies, and heartfelt support to those on the journey of solo parenting. With a touch of humor and a wealth of inspiration, this podcast invites single moms everywhere to join a community that understands and uplifts. Discover the power of shared experiences and the strength of single mothers, because together they are truly unstoppable.
We're back. So you have several hats. You're an OT, you're an IBCLC, you're a parent. I'm curious where you're going to go with this. So what is your final tip or piece of advice for new and expectant parents?
So my number one piece of advice is focus on building your toolbox, and it can transcend any situation. And this is where like, I always get how do you balance being an OT and IBCLC? As an OT, one of the things I'm always trying to focus on is quality of life, quality of living, but specific to each person. So my toolbox is not going to look like yours, Deb. What I want parents to focus on, especially in that early postpartum, is putting the right tools in your toolbox. Now, tools can be things as literal as having the right pump flanges, using ice rather than like excessive heat and aggressive massage. They can be really physical things like that. But also you have the more abstract things like having the right resources in place, having the things that you know will work best for your family. So that way, when you are in times where you might not have all the information laid out in front of you, but you can go into your toolbox and be like, well, in similar situations, this has really worked for our family. And that toolbox, just like the milk, shouldn't stay stagnant. That toolbox should really grow with you as a family, checking back in that you have your own, your family might have its own, but putting the right strategies in your toolbox will be really helpful and credible there.
Oh, that is a really, really great tip. Thank you. Where can people find your work? So
my private practice name is Nurturing Lift. Lift is an acronym. I love acronyms. It's lactation and infant feeding therapy. So www.nurturinglift.com. I'm also on Instagram and Facebook, nurturinglift_OT. I really try to bring a lot of creativity to those platforms and try to get little messages out, especially on things that are topics like mastitis, just so families have more information.
This is so great. I'll make sure that is also in our show notes. Bella, I feel like I have more of a grasp of this now. And I feel like I will not be the person being like, heat. Yeah, so now I know. Now I know what not to say, because I don't want to, put out the wrong advice that could possibly hurt someone. So thank you for sharing this. You gave some really practical information. I love people walking away with like, okay, this is what to do. This is not what to do. Here are my symptoms. When do I call for help? So thank you for sharing your knowledge. I really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you so much again for having me.
You're so welcome.
This has been an episode of Yoga Birth Babies, produced by Prenatal Yoga Center. You can catch us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Periscope. I'm Deb Flaschenberg. Thanks for listening.
You were probably expecting one, but got pregnant with two. We get it. Twin Talks encourages moms who are expecting twins as well as experienced moms of multiples. Together, we'll explore the unique challenges new parents face when raising 2 or more children of the same age. Join us as we embrace the joys of parenting when you've got double the duty. Subscribe through your favorite podcast app or say, "Hey Alexa, play the Twin Talks podcast." And be sure to visit newmommymedia.com to check out our other parenting shows, Preggy Pals, Newbies, Parent Savers, and The Boob Group. Twin Talks, parenting times 2.